So, who in the room, I'm going to talk a little bit about my work, but I also want to tell you some stories tonight. But first, I just have a question, and you can just raise your hand. But who in this room loves paperwork? Good. Oh, good. Do you work with the government? So nobody, does anybody just like love filling out forms and like checking boxes, filling in the blanks? Nobody. All right. Just one. All right. One ally back there. So I can't say that I love it, but as someone who has worked their entire career at various levels of government, I do quite a bit of paperwork. So maybe it's growing on me, I'm not sure. But paperwork is important, isn't it? Everyone's like, they're real hesitant to agree with me because they're worried, everyone's looking for the door. Oh gosh, is she gonna give us a lecture about documentation? My coworker Jeff is here, he's probably gonna run right now. So I'm not gonna give you a lecture about paperwork, so rest easy, calm down. I just wanna tell you a story. So I entered Ohio's foster care system when I was just a baby. It was actually pretty straightforward, and I was adopted before too long by my foster parents, who are loving and brilliant. They actually have been foster parents for about 45 years. They still serve as foster parents today. Someone told me recently that they've fostered like 280 children over the years. So I grew up, as normal as you can in a working foster home with foster siblings coming and going. And while I have two lovely parents who are amazing, and I think are really proud of me, I'm sure my mom is probably, if you're live streaming this, she's probably watching this and will embarrass me later. But I'm sure many of you in the room will relate that even though I grew up, with a pretty normal family, with two loving parents, with a great family, in a great community, I couldn't help but wonder where I came from. I'm so different from my family in some really peculiar ways. One example, I have been an avid runner for most of my life. My parents would only run if being chased by dinosaurs. They think I'm an alien because I love running. I love coffee. My parents think it is the most disgusting thing in the world, and they let me know that anytime they see me drinking coffee. Perhaps they often tease me, that's why I'm so short, because I drink too much coffee. It's just kind of weird. I think red hair and freckles and a nose that I always thought was just like a little too big for my face. Where did those traits come from? Where did those characteristics come from? So, when I learned a handful of years ago that birth records would be available to adoptees, thanks in no small part to the people in this room, to Betsy and to the Adoption Network's leadership and advocacy, I applied right away. I filled out the forms, I checked the boxes, I filled in the blanks, I did the paperwork. So I mailed it in, and I waited, not so patiently, because I am not a very patient person. So I waited not so patiently for the response, and it came just a few weeks later, which by government standards is lightning. So it came a few weeks later, and I was absolutely shaking as I was opening this envelope, just nervous with anticipation. I was finally gonna have these answers. At the time, I was dealing with some pretty significant health issues, so I was really eager to learn about my family medical history. So a lot was riding on this envelope, this seemingly kind of white envelope that was sitting on my kitchen counter. So I opened it up, again, buzzing with excitement, and I finally had this shot at having answers. So maybe I put a little too much pressure on this envelope by this point, but that's where I was. So imagine my disappointment when I opened my envelope that I had been waiting on to find that most of my birth record was blank. You see, someone, decades ago, did not fill out the necessary paperwork in order for my birth record to be complete. Paperwork matters. So now I did not work my way towards becoming a social worker or a children's services caseworker or even Ohio's first youth ombudsman because of a paperwork oversight from years and years ago. I don't have some deep vendetta to right the wrongs of forgotten forms. That's not why I'm here. My path here is, of course, much more complex than that. But can you imagine what my social work students learned about proper documentation when I was teaching? Can you imagine what my own case notes looked like when I was doing direct service? Even now, I document everything, every meeting, every phone call I have, I'm documenting. documenting it. I'm not here because of paperwork, but I'm here to say that when we serve human beings, the magnitude of our work should never be lost on us. We impact lives in a way that should excite us and terrify us and motivate us all at the same time. We owe it to those who depend on us. We must take care of ourselves so that we can do our best work, because the people that I work with, the people that I serve, they deserve my best work. We must treat every person as the most important person. We must hold ourselves accountable and be forever learners, and we must listen and be responsive. It's with that mindset that I Serve Ohio as your first youth ombudsman. Our team is here to listen. We're here to help. We meet youth where they are, and we listen without defense to their concerns. Young people might need our help having a difficult conversation with a caseworker or their foster parent. Youth might need our help to make sure that their voices are being heard and that their opinions are being considered. Youth might even need to reach out to us if they suspect that their rights have been violated. Our office started out as an idea, and I think this is so cool. It started out as an idea, and as many ideas do, it took on various forms. And ultimately, it came to exist in House Bill 4, which was signed into law earlier this year. This is an accomplishment for all of Ohio. This is historical. We've never had anything like this in Ohio. But it's especially an accomplishment and a testament to the foster youth and alumni who raised their voices and told their stories to make the children's services system better and stronger. And many of them did that not for themselves, but for the young people who would follow them. They did that for their brothers and sisters in the foster care system. And I'm so proud of them, and I'm proud to have the privilege to serve in this way. The Youth and Family Ombudsman Office opened to the public on May 31st of this year. So we're babies in terms of the life of a government agency, so we're still learning quite a bit, but we've been quite busy. I'm honored tonight. I was joined by my coworker, Jeff. I'll embarrass him. Everyone say hi, Jeff. Hi, Jeff. So what do we do every day? Well, we receive and review complaints from individuals, including youth, who are concerned about their experiences in the children's services system. As a neutral party, we investigate and we issue informed, fact-based recommendations to improve the situation. We facilitate many times meaningful dialogue between the parties to move things forward in a constructive way. And we are quite excited to say that we collect data that will hopefully inform system transformation at a state level. Now, you might be thinking that I sound like a little optimistic to be talking about conflict resolution. Anyone like, yeah, conflict resolution, it sounds wonderful, sounds real positive. But in fact, our team is really realistic about how we approach concerns and complaints. Do we have really hard conversations? Yes. Does everyone agree with us all the time? No. Do we sometimes have to deliver bad news? Yes. Absolutely. Do we please everyone all the time? Absolutely not. But that's the name of the game when you're working in conflict resolution. We're looking to resolve concerns and make things better, not just for the person in front of us, but for everyone. And so I want to share with you tonight 3 key ingredients to resolving conflict through collaboration. And I hope that they'll be meaningful to you. So my 3 key ingredients are dignity, honesty, and focus. So first, let's talk about dignity. Simply listening with kindness. We talk so much about speaking with kindness and acting with kindness, but we often forget to listen with kindness. So when we listen with kindness and without defense or judgment, it can go a long way to bringing open minds to the table. When we listen, see all the sirens, they agree with me. When we listen to understand, rather than strategize our response, we restore a person's dignity in that moment that we choose to do that. Many of our youth complainants express their gratitude and quite frankly their surprise that we have even taken the time to listen to their concerns. And I don't have to tell all of you this, but a teenager whose life is the subject of a case doesn't necessarily care how busy we are or what rules or mandates we might have to follow. A caseworker who has too many cases and far too little time might naturally feel defensive when we come along seemingly questioning their hard work. When someone is in an emotional state, they're in that emotional state of survival, they can't see the forest through the trees. And if you remember your trauma training, they're thinking with their amygdala and their hippocampus. And we really need to be talking like frontal lobe to frontal lobe when we're having these types of conversations. So the first thing that we have to do is, before we can help someone understand the process and bring them to the table, we have to first tend to their emotions, even in a very superficial way, but even in a very small way, we can tend to their emotions. We have to help them regulate through reflective listening and validation and just basic compassion. We have to make them feel safe in that conversation before we can have any kind of meaningful dialogue. So do everyone remember that story I told you about the paperwork blunder that casually altered the course of my life? Everyone remember that story? Okay. I don't know what led to that mistake. It could have been a simple oversight. Maybe the caseworkers didn't think it would make a difference because records were sealed at that time anyway. Maybe there was a misinterpretation of a policy or a rule. Maybe the caseworker actually did complete the form, but it got lost in some paperwork on someone else's desk. The point is, I don't know. And I would live in constant anger and resentment if I didn't prioritize the dignity of the people who were involved, people that I don't even know. I can treat people with respect, and I can advocate for things to be better, and I can do those two things at the exact same time. Now, I told you there were 3 ingredients, and we've talked about dignity, and I want to talk about honesty next. In order for meaningful dialogue to occur, in any situation, but especially in our work as Ombudsman, we must be transparent. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have confidentiality and privacy to contend with, especially as Ombudsman. Our work is highly confidential, as you all can imagine. But we can be open and honest about the process. Because when we do that, that helps everyone feel safe around the table. We can manage expectations, and we can call everyone in. We don't avoid conversations because we fear how one side might react. We change the way that we approach those conversations. How many times, show of hands, how many times have you walked away from a conference room only to have like the meeting after the meeting? Anybody done that? Yeah, I've been in lots of those. Okay, so that's where you have the small group has the meeting after the meeting where you talk about the real issues that everyone was too afraid to talk about in the meeting room. You know, you talked about them in these vague and nuanced terms, like we've all been there. Now, if that's happening, those meetings aren't there resolving conflict or solving a problem or moving things forward. It's only managing it. It's only managing the noise. And you're not really making progress when that's happening. So I mentioned I promised you 3 ingredients. I'm going to share my final tip, my best tip actually, to resolving conflict and having really hard, really critical conversations. And it's focus. We must, and I'll say this again, we must center the child in every conversation and every decision. This sounds so simple, center the child, sounds so simple, but failing to do this, and I can share with experience, failing to do this is often the root of many, many high conflict situations. When we feel ourselves getting defensive, or when we hear critical feedback about our work, and we instantly feel like we're being attacked, when we have that feeling, our stress response has taken over, and we put ourselves in the center of that conversation. We've made it about us. And our goal, our primary goal in that meeting, in that conversation, in that dialogue, it's survival. If I could actually give a gift to the world, it would be to give everyone the capacity to do this in every conversation, whether it's a meeting at a school about a student, an IEP meeting, a case management call, an adoption match meeting, a delinquency hearing, anything. Because when we look for opportunities to just simply slow down in a time of crisis, and center the child and keep the child centered, collaboration is stronger and we make better decisions. So I'll tell you a quick story about how my own practice changed once I adapted to this kind of radical child-centered approach, once I committed to that. So in the past, I think it was mentioned that I had worked as a forensic interviewer, and I primarily served child sexual assault survivors in that work. And so when I was completing my training, I was a baby social worker, brand new social worker, and I was going to forensic interview training, which occurs at the peace officer training at the police academy. So I was there, and one of the activities that they would have us do is they'd put us in a room with an actor who was portraying a child victim. And we'd have to interview them, and we'd follow all the steps, and we had to really, that kind of practical application of the content, of the knowledge that we just hopefully consumed. I can't tell you how nervous I was to have my first debrief, knowing that my peers, that my classmates, that my instructors would be there dissecting and evaluating my interview. When I was sitting in that room, I remember my skin was hot, my ears were ringing, my heart was just pounding out of my chest, my vision was blurry, I felt like I was in a tunnel. Like, everyone's felt this way before. I was not regulated. I was having a stress response, and in fact, I was kind of sitting there melting down. And here's what they told me. Here's the feedback they gave me. They said that I used too many vocal pauses. So that's the and like I said, I did that too many times. They said my rapport narrative was too weak and too superficial, so I didn't spend enough time building a relationship with the victim. They said that I asked some leading questions, which is a no-no, that my eye contact was really inconsistent. So I sat there and I just took all that feedback. And on the outside, I said, thank you for that feedback. And on the inside, I was melting and dying inside. I felt like I had failed. I felt like I would never be a forensic interviewer, that I was probably going to get fired from being a social worker, if that's even possible. Like, they were going to pull my social worker card for me. And then I started to get self-righteous. Like, first I kind of felt bad for myself, and I was like, you know what? Those instructors are out to get me. That's what's happening. They're picking on me because I'm the youngest person here, and I was the youngest person in this training class. So they're just picking on me. They're using me as an example because I'm young and cocky. And so I steeled myself, and I went back up to my room, and I called a trusted social work mentor who was a professor of mine, and I was gonna get a pep talk. That's what I needed at that moment. And I called the wrong person because she right away, very sternly and unapologetically, told me that I was scared and that it was making me selfish. That was not the pity party that I was expecting when I picked up the phone. I was expecting her to validate how I was feeling, and she wasn't doing it. The interview wasn't about me. I had to force myself to think rationally and logically. I had to regulate my thinking. She asked me some interesting questions. She said, Jenny, how did the victim respond when you were using all those vocal pauses? Did it make it seem awkward? She asked me if I felt that the abuse narrative, once we got to that part, was perhaps limited because I didn't spend enough time working on rapport. She asked me if my leading questions might have interfered with my fact gathering in that interview. She asked me if I was able to get a good assessment of the victim's developmental stage, for example, because I was asking those types of questions. To be honest with you, my friends, I think we're friends now, to be honest with you, I had barely thought of the victim at all when I was receiving all of that feedback in that classroom. I barely thought of that victim, of that child victim, of that actor, because all I was doing was thinking about myself. I wasn't thinking from a place of logic. I was dysregulated, and I was emotional. It made me defensive. And I put myself in the center of that conversation. And I did that at the expense of the child that I was trying to help. So, as I wrap this up, when we center the child, we simply have more clarity. We apply logic and reasoning. We have the space to actually apply training. When we center the child, we tend to listen more than we speak. When we center the child, we treat others in the room with dignity, and we assume good intent, or as my coworker Jeff says, unconditional positive regard. Compassion actually belongs in these conversations, even when the person on the other side of the table maybe has done something wrong or has done something to hurt someone else. Compassion belongs in those conversations. Defensiveness and anger do not. The magnitude of our work and the impact that we can possibly have on others is just simply too important. When you're in the business of people, when your business is helping people, you have to position that forward always, because the magnitude of our work should never be lost on us. Our children's services system is always evolving here in Ohio, and it should. I hope it never stops evolving. We should be responsive to new research. We should be responsive to best practice. We should be constantly changing and evolving. because there's always room to be stronger and to be more responsive. So here at the Youth and Family Ombudsman Office, we play a small but hopefully significant part in that transformation. We are certainly here to listen, and we are here to bring people together, and we can get better at what we do every single day here in Ohio. So I'm happy to talk more with any of you, answer any questions, but I just want to say thank you for welcoming us here tonight. And I wouldn't be a social worker if I didn't ask you all for something before I give up the microphone. One thing that we recognize here at the Youth and Family Ombudsman Office is that there are a lot of young people who need to know about us that don't. So I ask each of you to consider your own communities and the spaces where you live and work, and think about who might need to know about the Youth Ombudsman, who reaches out to foster youth, and please connect with us so that we can share information with them. We really want to extend this type of work and this type of listening ear to as many youth who need our help. So thank you so much for welcoming me tonight, and I really appreciate all of you. Thank you for listening and being here with me.